Okay, so we begin today with a knowledge area which is called risk management. It is one of the very crucial knowledge areas. It is very detailed in its description, and there are a lot of processes in this. So we will take this up very slowly because we need to appreciate the presence of risk in almost all activities that we are doing with regards to the knowledge area during the execution. So I think you had mentioned you have been doing you have been into designing, right, in your projects, Mega?
Sorry, whether into designing you are asking, right?
Yeah, I was asking whether in your projects you have been into the designing phase, right?
Like test design, I am into, not into the development design, like
Okay.
initial
And
design. But
during that process, have you all encountered any kind of risk?
yeah, requirements might not be gathered correctly,
Okay.
so it might
So
not be detailed.
okay, so there might be risks which you have anticipated, and there might have been risks which you had not foreseen, and there are unforeseen risks which come in. So have you had an experience of uh, collecting risks which you were anticipating, which you were planning that this risk might happen, and for if this risk is going to happen, we are going to tackle it, or we are going to have a contingency for that risk in a particular way. Have you ever gone through that process? I'm asking you because accordingly, then I would want to, discuss this knowledge area with you.
Risk regarding the schedule, I used to face many times. Like I'm not able to complete on schedule
Right.
and need to ask for an extended timeline.
And that would be most of the time for unforeseen situations, right?
Yeah, unforeseen situations like whatever deployed might need to redeploy because of the poor quality and all.
Right. And has there been any situation where you were anticipating a risk for which you had planned? Was there a situation
Mm.
where there was a risk which came, and you all as a team knew that this risk can happen, but and you all have already made some kind of a plan? Have you gone through that experience, or your risks has always been unforeseen risks?
Like environment might not be ready by the time we are into execution. Like that we anticipated it. Like everything might not be ready by that time. Although we have to complete on a specific schedule,
Okay.
environment might not be ready
So I gather
because
that
of
most of the time.
dependency on one team. Yeah,
Okay, so I gather most of the time it was with regards to schedule, and
yeah,
most of those were risks which were not foreseen, which and you all were not anticipating. It happened while you all were executing the project, correct?
yes.
Right. So we have to look at it. I asked you this question simply because now we are looking for the project management. You have to have a very big vision in front of you with regards to how big the project is, because it's a project which is big, spread out, with hundreds of people into it, a lot of stakeholders. Your deliverables have been clearly marked. Your project charters have been made. There is project management plan in place. You have already gone with regards to creating the baselines for your scope, for your cost, and your schedule. So we are talking of that kind of a project. And with that kind of project in mind, and you being the project manager for that kind of a project, you have got a lot of aspects that you have to curtail and cover with regards to the risks that is going to happen with regards to your project. So it's basically identifying, evaluating, and planning risk response for the risks that are already might happen, anticipated risks. So in a large project, more of your effort goes towards first identifying, evaluating, and planning risk responses for risks which are identified. So maybe from the experience that you come from, unplanned or unforeseen risks were the main risks that you were tackling. But when you're wearing a PMBOK cap, when you're answering questions for PMP, you as a project manager will think about a very large project with a lot of people inside. as stakeholders and project team members. You have done all the protocols of making a project charter, of creating a project management plan, creating the baselines for your scope, schedule, and cost, and the other knowledge areas. And you have systematically gone through the process of what is called risk management. So the risk management is more about identifying, evaluating, and planning the risk responses for the risks which have been identified. That is more of risk management compared to the risks which are not identified. Of course, we will be facing risks which are not identified, but as a project manager, as a project management professional, you will be planning towards risks which are identified before you start executing a project. So the basic idea for me to give you this background is because, now see, if you remember, we had created a budget, and in that budget we had something which we called as a contingency reserve, which was added to create a scope baseline or to create a cost baseline. Do you remember that? We had identified all the
Yes.
activities, and we were just going out above and above, and we were creating. And after we had made all the baselines, before we make the final baselines, we had something which was contingency reserve, and contingency reserve is added to whatever we have calculated, and that formed your basic baseline. So your baseline has got something which is called a contingency reserve, which is basically what you have calculated for identified risks which you're anticipating in this project. It may or may not happen, but it is an identified risk. You are anticipating it to happen. Hence, you have, when you're doing your project planning and creating your baselines, you anticipated and you created that hero contingency reserve. Now, your contingency reserve does not mean it's a budget. If you remember, above contingency, we had put something which was called a management reserve. And management reserve is basically for those kind of risks which are not identified. We do not know the nature of what kind of risks we are not able to foresee right now. So if that happens, for that we calculate from our past experiences and by our talking with the experts and having your own judgment and looking at past history, that there x amount can be a good amount for having a management reserve. So we are putting the management reserve with the budget. The budget already has contingency reserve for identified risk. Management reserve is for unidentified risk, and that totally becomes your budget. So with that perspective in mind, let's think of risk management as a project manager who's managing a very big project. So risk management is a process of identifying, evaluating, and planning responses to event, both positive and negative, that might occur through the course of the project. So normally when we talk of risks are always looked at it in a very, we got a very negative connotation to risks. They are always identified as threats. But risks are of two types. One is a positive risk and one is a negative. Your negative risk are the threats that you anticipate and you're managing, and there's something which is called as opportunities. Opportunities are positive risks, so you have to amplify, you have to expand, you have to push, and you have to see to it that you are making the most of the positive risks, the opportunities that you are finding during your project management, and you have to curtail and minimize the threats that you anticipate as the negative risks during your project. Given the iterative nature of project management, a response strategy for newly discovered risks may create other risks which must be identified and managed. Iterative means you are at every phase when you are doing your projects, you are iterating a process for a particular sprint. And during that particular sprint, you are creating a delivery or some kind of a scope that you are managing. And while doing that, if you are discovering a new risk there and you're creating a response for that risk while you're doing that iteration, that project, that response strategy to curtail that particular risk can also create some risk in future which you're not anticipating or not foreseeing right now. So as a project manager, always understand, in an iterative kind of a project where you're iteratively and creating your deliverables and going through those sprints, and during that time identifying something which was not identified before, you'll come together and create a response, and you respond to the risk positively to curtail it and move ahead. There could be a chance that the response that you worked upon could in future, during your further iterations or with regards to some other activity or other scheduled timeline could create a risk which was not foreseen, or could be an additional risk because of the risk that response that you have taken at this point of time. Up to 90% of the threat identified and investigated in the risk management process can be eliminated by changing how the project work is planned and performed. Now look at it. 90% of the risks that are negative risks, which are called threats, identified and investigated during the risk management process. So what are you doing? When you are in the planning stage, you are identifying the risks which are almost up to 90%. So there is only 10% of risks that are not identified and that are not planned. But from the experience that you come from, see how different it is. You are basically not even in the process of identifying the risks which you might anticipate, which constitute 90% in a project which is as big as this, or which comes from the PMBOK kind of knowledge area, where a PMP certified project manager will be planning a project where a risk management already manages 90% of risks at the planning stage. So this is very important from the perspective that we are always talking of risks which are identified, investigated, and they are eliminated even before you start your project. When assessing risk, it's necessary to determine the probability that a risk event will occur, the change of possible outcome, expected timing for it to occur in the project life cycle, the anticipated frequency of risk events from that source. There's always a root cause. If you're not addressing it, then that root cause can create risks again and again if they are not eliminated at the root level. Now, every project and every organization, they have got their own appetite for risk, or they want a tolerance for risk. So that is what is a risk appetite, is the level of risk an individual or a group is willing to accept. So your project will have got limitations. They will have the limits up to which they would want to get into a situation where there is risk. So there is a threshold there, and there is an appetite. So first comes the appetite, or your tolerance level, that I will be able to accept only this kind, only risks only to this level. And what is the threshold? Threshold is a border, the specific point at which you will stop accepting any more risks. If that threshold is met with regards to budget, you will say X amount of dollars. Beyond that, I'm not ready to take any risk. So that becomes a threshold with regards to cost. And if you say beyond 6 months, I'm not ready to push this project or this activity or this phase ahead, will become the threshold with regards to your schedule. Risk averse is someone who doesn't want to be negatively impacted by risk, by the threat. So you cannot get into a process where you do not want to be affected by risks, because your risk, like I said, can have positive and negative implications. But here, someone who's a risk averse, or who have got an approach or a philosophy of being risk averse, will not want to get into a situation where there could be a threat with regards to risk which will affect them negatively. So they don't want to get into that phase. So those people are risk averse. Risks are reviewed in every meeting. Triggers are monitored. Triggers will be a part of your risk register, which we will be discussing in future. So to understand, when it triggers, you know that the anticipated risk is going to happen, and the risks addressed before they happen. Risk management process is iterative. Till your process is complete, till your execution is complete, you are in every phase, in every knowledge area, always looking out for risks, for identified risks. If they happen, you are ready to come with a response plan and mitigate it. If unforeseen happens, you are going to get into meetings and try to find out what should be the action plan for us. And if we are able to manage that risks, then do we tackle that risk with the management reserves that we've got, or do you think that this reserve has to be shared, or it has to be eliminated, or you just want to ignore it? What will be the actions towards those? We will be looking, because there are various ways of handling risks. So we see almost 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 planning uh, aspects to the knowledge area of risk management when it comes to the planning phase. So you got processes where you'll first plan the risk management. After you plan, which will be a holistic guide for you to manage your risk management, you will then start identifying the risks. This is during the planning stage. Then you have not even started. The planning stage, you will identify risk. Then what are you doing? You're analyzing those risks that you have identified. First, you are doing a qualitative risk analysis. Then you are doing a quantitative risk analysis. And then after that, once you have identified the risk, you have analyzed the risk, you are then creating the response in plan risk response. So your plan risk response is the response that you have planned after you have identified and analyzed the risks, and then anticipating that you have created the right approach towards those risks to mitigate those risks. And when you come into the execution part of it, you are implementing the risk response that you had created, and that to see to it that the anticipated risk, the risk that you had identified that you are anticipating might happen, if they happen, you have got a plan in process to respond to those risks. You will be putting that into action. And obviously, when you are getting into the execution, there might be some differences with regards to what you have planned and what is actually happening. That's the time you're monitoring it to seeing to it that what you have planned is happening, is being implemented properly during the execution phase. And if it is not, what are the reasons and what are the actions that we need to take timely to see to it that these risks do not derail our project with regards to our scope, schedule, and cost. So on a large, properly managed project where risk management has been an integral part of planning, the following things will occur. There is no longer huge fires to put out every day. They are eliminated with the risk response plan. You are not finding suddenly a risk happening and then you're looking, okay, what to do. We are not putting on fires which have just sprung up. We are basically created a proper response plan, and we work towards the risk that prop up as the risks which have been already having a response plan for them. Risks are reviewed in every meeting, triggers are monitored, and risks are addressed even before they happen. Because a risk trigger will say, okay, the risk that you had anticipated and this week during this schedule during this activity, we are getting a trigger that the risk is coming on board. If it's coming on board, let us implement the risk response. This is what you discuss in a review meeting. Risks are addressed even before they happen. Normally, if a risk event does occur, there is a plan in place because you made your risk response plan. Hectic meetings to develop response are a rarity and are only needed when an unknown risk event occurs and requires the development of a workaround. Only you will be rushing or trying to develop something by calling a hectic meeting or an emergency meeting is only when you foresee a risk which was not planned, which was not identified. Only for that you will have to take a immediate push hectic action. As a result, the project manager has time for efforts such as, now if you're a project manager who's already done that in this kind of a project, you have got time to monitor and control the various aspects of the project, looking for deviation and trends, implementing reward systems because you're working with your project team, your stakeholders, and you are supposed to be managing the resource management aspect of things. You are developing the team. Again, you're at that point, you are in the execution stage of resource management, keeping stakeholders informed of the progress, because that is what you are, one of your functions is to keep all the stakeholders informed. Yesterday we discussed on the communication, how, when, and in what fashion does a stakeholder needs to be updated, informed with regard to the project's progress. Is that's what you will be doing. You'll be getting time for that rather than rushing and trying to put off emergency fires which are just propping up out of unidentified risks. Those situations will be rare, and you stay ahead of the project because you got the project totally under your control when you're doing something like that. So we are looking at 5 processes in planning, 1 process in executing, and 1 process in monitoring control. So we here will be concentrating more towards planning, because here you're first planning a risk management plan, then you're identifying, then you're analyzing, and after that you're creating a response for all those activities which are all the risks which have been identified. So the risk management plan may include risk strategy, your methodology towards managing those risks, the roles and responsibilities of the stakeholders and the team players with regards to managing that risk, fundings, timings, risk categories, stakeholders' risk appetite, definition of probability and impact. Probability and impact is the analysis that you're going to do with regards to the risk, reporting of the risk, and tracking those risks. So this plan, making a plan, risk management is This plan becomes a component of the project management plan, documenting how the remaining risk processes will be performed. This plan is high level. Details will be created in the other risk processes. So this is going to be a high level overview of seeing how we're going to manage things. The details will happen later. So what are the inputs that you're seeing that will be coming here? We are looking at all components of your project management will be a part and input of this risk management. Why? Common sense. Risks can come out of scope, they can come out of schedule, they can come out of cost, they can come out of quality, they can come out of communication, they can come out of stakeholders, they can come out of procurement. That's the reason all the project management plans will be uh, the inputs here, because you are trying to derive, identify risks from all those project management plans that you have created. Project documents, here you're looking at stakeholder register and some documents you'll be looking depending on where you are finding the potential of influences of risks happening. Project charter, maybe because you might have some kind of an overview or something which has already been passed on to you, or there could already be some constraints with regards to this project which is clearly identified and noted in your project charter. You need to be aware of it. And risks can be classified in many ways, including external, internal, technical, commercial, and unforeseeable. What do they mean exactly? So, an external are regulatory, environmental, or governmental issues. Whatever shifts happen in the market with regards to rules and regulations which are outside the project's control, which is outside your domain, are the external risks. Internal will be your risks with regard to your project. That could be the changes in the schedule, budget, scope. Your team members might be inexperienced. You might be issues with your equipments, machinery, people. Those are internal risks that you are facing because it's happening inside your project management domain. Then there could be some technical changes and technical processes and interfaces, some applications which change with technology. So those technical changes could have an impact positively or negatively towards your